Robocop 3. You will believe a man with a metal bucket on his head can fly. Wait, he flies now? He flies now in Robocop 3, otherwise known as the one where Robocop drives a pink Cadillac. Released in 1993, this entry focuses on Murphy/Robocop joining forces with the poor underground dwellers of Detroit, who plan to fight back and take a stand against the evil OCP, this time run by the legendary Rip Torn, as the company finally plans to destroy Detroit in order to build Delta City. To make matters worse, Robocop has to deal with the death of his partner and friend Officer Lewis, played by Nancy Allen, while also fighting ninja androids and an evil British guy stereotype. Yeah, I know the character is called McDaggett, but to me he was always known as evil British guy. In this very flawed but easy to digest Robocop movie, which has spirit and tries hard, but doesn't live up to the intensity of its predecessors. So buckle up as we explore 10 things that you didn't know about Robocop 3. The exciting and action-packed Robocop movie that left fans saying, it's okay, I guess. So let's check it out. No, I am not wearing these sunnies for the rest of the video as they are irritating my eyes. Number 10. Peter Weller's graceful exit. Yes indeed, as any Robocop fan would tell you, the amazing and legendary Peter Weller did not return for Robocop 3, making the third entry the odd one out, and stick out like a sore thumb, especially considering the fact that Weller made the part of Murphy and Robocop his own in such a heartfelt and extraordinary way. However, contrary to popular belief, Weller didn't decide to not return to Robocop because he didn't want to, but in actual fact he was quite keen to come back. Despite the fact that Weller wasn't happy with the outcome of Robocop 2, according to IMDb, he still met up with Robocop 3's director, Fred Dekker, to discuss the part, and claimed that he wanted to return for the third time, but he just couldn't because he was already contracted to star in the surreal David Cronenberg movie The Naked Lunch. Supposedly, Michael Dudikoff was offered the role of Robocop, but he didn't want to take it because he was friends with Peter Weller. So the part ended up going to Robert John Burke, who was a black belt in karate, and thus could use that in his Robocop movements. It was also felt that he would bring a lot of heart to the role. A few years later, he would star in the Stephen King adaptation of Thinner, and has frequently appeared in movies and TV shows ever since, including Law & Order and Black Klansman. And to be fair, when he's in his Robo armor, he looks just like how Peter Weller did in the previous movies. Same with when we see his unmasked Murphy face. In fact, when I was a kid, I couldn't tell the difference. I thought that Robocop was played by the same guy in all three films. But looking at it objectively, he never quite got the voice right.
Police officer, no loitering. You called for backup?
But regardless, Fred Dekker really appreciated the fact that Weller met up with him personally to tell him that he couldn't star in Robocop 3. But hang on, The Naked Lunch came out in 1991, and Robocop 3 didn't come out until 1993. So how could there be scheduling conflicts? Well, I'm glad you asked, you enthusiastic viewers, as this segues into my next point. Number 9. Production put on hold. Robocop 3 was meant to be filmed back-to-back with Robocop 2, with the third movie going into production as soon as production on the second movie wrapped up, similar to how Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3 were made just a few years earlier. And once production on Robocop 2 was finished, production had started up for Robocop 3, with the movie actually being filmed in 1991, with the intention of the movie being released in 1992. However, there was one major issue. Orion Pictures, whom were distributing the movie, as they did the previous two Robocop films, were facing dire financial issues. So because of this, despite Robocop 3 already being filmed, or at least most of it being filmed, the project was scrapped and abandoned for a year. till finally Columbia TriStar Film Distributors bought out the production, leaving them in charge of ROBOCOP 3's international releases. So despite most of the movie being made in 1991, it wouldn't be released until 2 years later in 1993. Number 8. Director and writer weren't seeing eye to eye. I already mentioned in the RoboCop 2 episode that comic book writer and artist Frank Miller was trying to get into Hollywood when he worked on the script for RoboCop 2. However, a lot of his ideas were changed and rewritten. Despite this, in the early days of RoboCop 3's production, he decided that he wasn't done trying to get into Hollywood and got to work on the script for RoboCop 3. He recycled several ideas that were scrapped from his original script for RoboCop 2. One of those ideas was supposedly the samurai androids. However, Robo3's director Fred Decker wasn't a fan of the script Miller had written, so he himself made drastic changes, to the point where he got a co-writer credit for the film. The frustration of this caused Miller to step away from Hollywood, of which he wouldn't return to the Hollywood movie-making industry until 2005, with the cinematic version of Sin City, which was based on his graphic novels. Miller spoke of his time working on RoboCop 2 and 3, where he said, "Don't be the writer. The director's got the power. The screenplay is a fire hydrant, and there's a row of dogs around the block waiting for it." Yeah, I guess he's saying that they're just gonna piss on his script. Miller's original vision of RoboCop 3 would be turned into an 8-part comic book series called RoboCop The Last Stand, and supposedly some of his abandoned ideas even made it into the short-lived RoboCop TV show, which was broadcast the following year in 1994. And for those who don't know, RoboCop 3's director Fred Decker also directed 80s cult movies Night of the Creeps and The Monsters Squad. Number 7. Recycled props. Given the fact that Orion Pictures were going through financial strains during the production of RoboCop 3, it was decided to try and keep costs down, so many leftover props from the previous 2 movies were recycled for RoboCop 3, including Ed 209, who makes a comeback. The most standout recycled prop used in RoboCop 3 was RoboCop's suit itself, which was actually a suit made for RoboCop 2, designed to be worn by Peter Weller. What's fascinating about this is the Robo armor in RoboCop Part 2 had a blue tint to it. So this costume was either made before the blue tint was added, or it was repainted for RoboCop 3. And what backs that claim up is, once again, according to IMDb, director Fred Decker didn't like how the RoboCop costume looked in Part 2, and in Part 3 wanted it to resemble more how it looked in the first movie. Actor Robert John Burke did struggle somewhat wearing the costume, as it was not catered for him, and he was actually taller than Weller, with the costume particularly hurting his neck, but thankfully he still managed to work with the costume. Unlike the previous 2 movies that were filmed in Texas, those locations being Dallas and Houston, RoboCop 3 was filmed at Atlanta, Georgia, and a lot of the rundown buildings seen in the movie were buildings scheduled to be demolished for the upcoming 1996 Olympic Games. The night shoots for RoboCop 3 could be challenging, as they were often filmed in below zero conditions. Ugh. Number 6. Robo for the kids. RoboCop 3 lost its main lead star with Peter Weller and its Orion distributors, but it also lost another vital component which made the other 2 movies stand out, and that was its brutal violence. Both RoboCop and RoboCop 2 created scary worlds where extreme violence and gore were never off limits, but Orion Pictures decided to give RoboCop 3 a PG-13 rating, rather than the R rating that the other 2 movies had. To many, this was the final nail in the coffin for RoboCop 3, and feel that giving the third entry a safer PG-13 rating neutered RoboCop, creating a more commercial-friendly diet soda version of RoboCop. This is why in the first movie, we see Ed 209 doing this. Whereas in Part 3, Ed 209 says lines like this.
Be loyal as a puppy.
Where this once brutal enemy can now be hacked by a kid and become a lovable hero. Orion Pictures did this as they felt that RoboCop had become a franchise that was mainly embraced by kids, hence all the action figures, comic books, video games, and animated series. The course direction to be more kid-friendly sees the addition of the Nico character, who is something of a child genius who becomes a kid's sidekick in the film. Even the movie's director, Fred Dekker, felt that it was a mistake to tone down the movie's action and violence for a younger audience. From a business perspective, I get it. It would have seemed like a smart move to make a RoboCop movie that was catering to kids, so they could actually go and see it in the theatres and thus have an increase in ticket sales. But from a creative perspective, it does feel like RoboCop had lost something special. Something that made the previous two movies stand out and be more memorable. I'll admit it, at the time, being a kid, it was exciting having a RoboCop movie aimed at me, one that I could actually go and see. But yeah, look, as an adult, I can see that losing its R rating made it lose its edge and generally pale in comparison to the previous two movies. Some things are just meant to be rated R, like you wouldn't get Pulp Fiction, the PG-13 rated sequel. It's kind of the same with RoboCop. Number 5. The return of RoboCop's original sound. Composer Basil Poledouris, who scored the first RoboCop movie, returned to score RoboCop 3. And it's great hearing the original theme return to the series, and brings a welcome touch of familiarity. Poledouris was unable to score RoboCop 2, probably because he was too busy scoring The Hunt for Red October at the time. So instead, Barry Lyndon composer Leonard Rosenman scored that entry, creating new themes. Dekker really wanted Poledouris to return for the third entry, which he did. Apart from a few new themes here and there, a lot of the score does feel cut and paste from the original score. But to me, that doesn't matter. It's just great having RoboCop back with the original score. In fact, RoboCop 3 has a few callbacks to the original movie that were missing in the second entry, including the "I'll buy that for $1" guy, as well as Ed 209 as mentioned. I'm guessing this is because RoboCop 2 only made $45 million at the box office, where the original made $53 million. So I guess they wanted to relive the glory days of the first movie. So maybe this was an intentional way of getting everyone to forget about part 2 and to try and feel closer to the original. Who knows, but hey, if they wanted to recapture the first movie, then they shouldn't have gone with a PG-13 rating. Yes, that PG-13 rating keeps getting brought up throughout this episode, but it's kind of an important deal when it comes to RoboCop 3. Number 4. The video games came out long before the movie. There were several games released that were based on RoboCop 3, which came out on popular systems like Super Nintendo, Sega, and Game Gear. The only thing is, the games were released throughout 1991 and 1992, long before RoboCop 3's actual release in late 1993. I can remember seeing the RoboCop 3 Super Nintendo game at a shop, and I didn't even know about the movie. I distinctively remember looking at the cover and thinking, where is this RoboCop movie where RoboCop has a jetpack? This comes back to the movie's delayed release, thanks to being shelved for a year. The game actually went into development in 1990, and Orion Pictures didn't give the developers too much information about the movie, as not to give too much of the plot away before the movie's release. So instead, the programmers had to use their imaginations and fill in the blanks thanks to tiny snippets that they were given. For example, they were told that RoboCop uses a gyrocycle, where they spent weeks planning a section of the game where RoboCop rides a motorcycle, only to then find out that he actually uses a jetpack and not a motorcycle vehicle. So there definitely was issues with communication. The game actually got pretty good feedback, although its difficulty was criticised. Regardless, the RoboCop 3 video games created an interesting situation in which gamers could play a game based on a movie long before the movie even came out. Number 3. The director's thoughts on RoboCop 3. Despite the fact that RoboCop 3 is considered the black sheep of the original RoboCop trilogy, as well as being one of those popular to hate on movies, its director Fred Dekker still has positive feelings when it comes to making the movie. He claims to have had a lot of fun making RoboCop 3, and is generally happy with the final product, while also acknowledging the flaws of RoboCop 3, like the decision to tone down the violence. He also felt that Alex Murphy's personal journey had wrapped up by the end of the first movie, and anything after that was just RoboCop fighting bad guys, which is a sentiment I kind of agree with. So by the time you get to a third movie, it's like, well, what's left to do with the character? Why make him fly, of course? I mean, at this stage, he's been through everything else. Some of the biggest regrets Decker has with the movie was not using Hong Kong-styled fighting scenes, particularly involving the Otomo character. Decker was a fan of Hong Kong martial arts movies and wanted to incorporate the genre into Robocop 3, but couldn't as there wasn't enough time and money to organise a martial arts stunt team. He also wishes that he did the flying scenes differently and made it look more exciting and spectacular, as well as use Dan O'Herlihy as the old man, who played the head of OCP in the first 2 Robocop movies but didn't return for the 3rd installment, to which he was replaced with the CEO character, played enthusiastically by Rip Torn. Supposedly, Decker wanted his friend and collaborator Shane Black to help rewrite the script. Beforehand, Black had written Decker's previous movies, Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad, as well as Lethal Weapon, but he couldn't help with the script of Robocop 3 as he was too busy working on The Last Boy Scout at the time. But he did end up having a small role in Robocop 3. Decker also nearly hired fellow collaborator Tom Atkins in the role of the movie's villain, Paul McDaggett, but the part went to actor John Castle, as the character was English, and Castle was, well, English. What I think is a shame is the fact that Fred Decker is a good director, but he didn't direct anything after Robocop 3, so it seems the disappointments of the movie killed a promising career, as well as Decker taking on all the blame and responsibility for the movie's failings. Decker acknowledges the faults of Robocop 3, but I do like that he still looks at the experience optimistically and acknowledges that there is stuff about the movie that he likes. Number 2, the TV show immediately followed. Despite the fact that Robocop 3 was not popular among fans when it was released, it wasn't the end of the metallic big guy. As desperate to get some income, Orion Pictures sold the Robocop rights to Skyvision Entertainment, which is a Canadian entertainment company, where they produced the Robocop TV series. A TV series which represents the measures a dying company would go to for a few more bucks. The first and only season of the TV show was broadcast in 1994, 1 year after the release of Robocop 3. And from my own memory, when it was shown here in Australia, it just didn't really catch on. I mean, everyone was rushing to watch Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, but no one really had any love for Robocop at that time. Maybe that's because people still had a bad taste in their mouths from Robocop 3. So maybe the show would have fared better if more time had passed so everyone can heal from Robocop 3. The show's production interestingly tried to get Peter Weller to return as Robocop, but when that didn't work they even tried Robert John Burke, but the part went to a Canadian actor called Richard Eden. But that's all I'm going to say about the Robocop TV series for now, as I kind of feel like it deserves its own episode. Number 1, Robocop 3 was a hit in France and Japan. Despite the fact that Robocop 3 was famously despised by fans, it actually performed quite well in other parts of the world. Yeah, huge shock, right? There were some people who seemed to love Robocop 3. Wow. It opened up at the number 1 spot in Japan and France, with the movie making over $10 million in the Japanese market and over $9 million in the French one. Robocop 3 had its premiere in Japan in April 1993, but in the States it didn't come out till November. This is supposedly because the release date was pushed back so it wouldn't be competing against the juggernaut that was Jurassic Park, and if that's the case, it was a wise move. All up, the movie made $47 million on a $22 million budget. It actually made more than Robocop 2, which only brought in $45 million. And it only made $6 million less than the original Robocop. So its performance wasn't a complete failure, especially when you take into account that it's a 3rd entry. The true failure of the movie lies in its reactions from fans and critics, who felt the action was lacking, the story was uninteresting, and of course the violence being toned down for a PG-13 rating. It seems that that decision alone kind of killed any potential for Robocop 3. Now, I kind of like the idea of the poor underground people of Detroit standing up to the evil OCP company, and it kind of brings the OCP storyline from the previous movies to a full circle. The biggest issue I personally have with Robocop 3 is the death of the Lewis character. Her character was such an important part of the Robocop story, and I felt that her death was really anticlimactic and didn't really amount to anything. I guess it makes RoboCop's journey in the movie more personal, but to me it kind of feels like a throwaway subplot, and that the character deserved better. Likewise with Part 2, I feel like Part 3 is just a fun comic book style movie. Nothing more than sheer popcorn fun. I get why people don't like it. I mean, yeah, the lack of violence leaves nothing to be desired. But I would be lying if I was to say that I didn't get some fun and enjoyment out of this movie. I don't think it deserves quite as much hate as it gets. It's competently made and has a top quality look and presentation, with the guns and explosions that you would expect from a B action movie. So is Robocop 3 a downgrade from its predecessors? Yeah, sadly it is, but that in no way makes it a terrible movie. It's not the best entry in the franchise, but it's still very watchable. Don't go into Robocop 3 expecting an intense experience like the first two movies. Just see it as an easy to digest popcorn movie. Who knows, if you watch it without all the negative criticisms about the movie circling in your mind, you might even find some enjoyment in it. Maybe just a little bit. Once again, I'm not excusing its faults, and if people really don't like it, I get it. I'm just trying to see some light at the end of the tunnel, which is an aspect that I always try to take with movies. You know, give them all a fair go. Anyway, I'm Minty, and say what you want to say about Robocop 3, to me it is still way better than the 2014 remake. See ya!